The sound of laughter still lingered from the dining room when my phone started buzzing on the counter. I almost didn't answer it. My dad was giving a toast, his voice strong and full of pride, and everyone was raising their glasses. But when I glanced at the screen and saw it was Mark calling on the secure line, my chest tightened up. My husband never called during family get-togethers unless it was something really important. I went out into the hallway to get away from the noise. "Hey, honey," I whispered, trying to sound cheerful even though I was nervous. His voice was low, serious, and he sounded like he was in a hurry. "Where are you?" "At my dad's birthday dinner." "Why?" "Take our son and leave right now." The glass in my hand almost slipped.
"What?
"What's going on?" "No time to explain. Just go." And then he hung up. The air around me felt like it had turned to ice. For a second, I just stood there staring at the family photos on the wall. My dad in his uniform, my mom smiling next to him, my little boy sitting on his lap. Everything looked so safe and normal. But the urgency in Mark's voice told me there was danger. Years working in military intelligence had taught me to trust my gut feeling. I turned back toward the dining room. The laughter sounded wrong to me now. Too loud, too ordinary. My father's voice boomed over the others. "Emily, come on, sweetheart. We're about to cut the cake." I forced myself to smile. I need to grab something from the car," I said, reaching for my son's hand. "Come on, buddy." He looked up at me, confused but ready to do what I asked. "Can I bring my toy?" "Sure, just hurry." As we headed for the door, I saw my mom give me a puzzled look. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said softly, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself. The cool night air hit me as we stepped outside. I buckled my son into his booster seat, then turned to look back at the house. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind heavy from everything I'd heard in that locker. The words, "Your father's company is being used as a front," looped through my thoughts like a curse I couldn't shake. I stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot, shadows under my cheeks, the face of someone who hadn't slept or trusted anyone in days. But that was the price of truth. I'd seen enough in my years as a Navy intelligence analyst to know that danger doesn't always wear a foreign face. It often hides behind a handshake and a smile. By the time the sun broke through the blinds, I'd made my decision. I was going back to the hospital. If I didn't face my father now, the fear would eat me alive. I packed up quietly while my son still slept, leaving a note for the motel clerk just in case. I didn't know who might be looking for me, and a paper trail, even a simple one, might help if I disappeared. When I reached the hospital, I paused in the parking lot. The air smelled faintly of rain, the kind that carried static before a storm. Inside, the corridors hummed with fluorescent lights and soft conversations. I followed the familiar path to his room, 214. My dad was awake, sitting up with his reading glasses on, flipping through a newspaper. His hand paused mid-turn when he saw me. "Emily," he said slowly, as if testing the sound of my name. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said, closing the door behind me. He folded the paper. "I don't blame you. That explosion scared everyone." "Stop," I said quietly. "We both know it wasn't a gas leak." He blinked once, maybe twice, but said nothing. I took out the photo from the envelope, the one of him shaking hands at the marina. I laid it on the tray table between us. "You want to explain this?" He leaned forward, squinting, then sat back with a sigh. "Where did you get that?" "From a locker Mark left for me." That got his attention. "Mark. He's alive." He turned toward me, serious again. "You were brave. I know you didn't feel like it, but you were." "Bravery is easy when you're too scared to think," I said with a faint laugh. "Besides, you trained me well." "Not for this," he said. "Not for family." We stood in silence for a long while. Then Dad joined us, holding my son's hand. His face was pale, but his eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in years. "I just talked to Lewis," he said. "They'll release the official statement tomorrow morning. They're calling me a whistleblower now." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "Guess it's never too late to learn humility." Mark extended his hand. It's an honor to serve alongside a man who still stands when it matters. Dad gripped his hand firmly. You brought my daughter home. That's honor enough for me. The four of us stood together by the railing, 3 generations, bruised but intact. My son leaned against my leg, tugging at my sleeve. Mom, can I feed the birds? I handed him the last of my sandwich crusts. Go ahead, sweetheart. He scattered the pieces into the wind, laughing as the gulls swooped down. The sound echoed across the water, pure and bright. For the first time in what felt like years, I smiled without forcing it. Later that evening, we stopped by the base chapel again, not for an investigation this time, but for a short service. The chaplain, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes, lit a candle for truth and healing. When she bowed her head, so did we. Afterward, as we walked back to the car, Dad said, You know, when I joined the Corps, I thought the hardest thing was surviving battle. Turns out the hardest thing is forgiving yourself when the battle's over. I slipped my arm through his. You don't have to forgive yourself alone, Dad. He looked at me, his eyes glistening. Neither do you, Emily. The drive home was quiet. My son fell asleep in the back. The windows were glowing with warm light, and I could see silhouettes moving around, hear laughter spilling out into the night. My father's shadow passed across the curtain. Then I noticed the SUV parked 2 houses down. It was black, with tinted windows, and the engine was running just enough to send out a faint trail of white exhaust into the cold air. My breath caught in my throat. I got into the driver's seat, my fingers shaking. Before starting the car, I checked the mirrors. The SUV didn't move, but its headlights flickered for a second, like a signal. I started the engine, my heart pounding, and pulled out of the driveway. The laughter from inside faded behind me. My son asked, Mom, where are we going? I swallowed hard. Somewhere safe, sweetheart. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. Still, I drove faster. 5 minutes later, when I stopped at the first red light, I reached into the glove compartment for some tissues and froze. There was a small flash drive wrapped in a folded note inside. It was Mark's handwriting. If I can't reach you again, trust no one, not even your father. The words swam before my eyes. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My father, the man who'd raised me to believe in honor, loyalty, and putting my country first. The light turned green. Horns started honking behind me. I pressed on the gas and kept driving, the paper shaking in my hand. I didn't understand anything yet. Why Mark sounded so scared. What danger was lurking outside that warm, familiar house. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it was no false alarm. A block later, my son had already fallen asleep, his head leaning against the window. I drove on through the quiet Virginia streets, my heart pounding with questions I couldn't answer. Then, as I turned down the road toward the highway, a flash of light lit up the night behind me. It was brighter than fireworks, louder than thunder. I slammed on the brakes, staring into the rearview mirror. I don't know, I said. You tell me. He rubbed his temple. Emily, whatever he told you, he's not who you think he is. The CIA's been investigating him for months. He's under suspicion for leaking information to private defense firms. Information that could jeopardize our national contracts. I froze. You're saying Mark's the traitor? I'm saying he's dangerous, my dad replied firmly. He's dragged you into something you don't understand. If he's feeding you lies about me, it's because he needs leverage. His words stung, but something about them felt rehearsed, like a line he'd practiced. Then why did someone try to kill you? I asked. If you're clean, why the fire? Why warn me to run? His jaw tightened. I don't know what he's told you, but I've spent my life protecting this country. You think I'd betray it for money, for power? I don't know what to think anymore, I whispered. We sat in silence for a long moment. The hum of the machines filled the room. Finally, he said quietly, I know you love him, Emily, but love doesn't make a man innocent. It blinds you. I met his eyes. And what about loyalty, Dad? Doesn't that blind you too? He looked away first. The Marine, who had always seemed so strong, now looked diminished and vulnerable under the harsh hospital lights. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want the truth, come alone. 5 a.m. tomorrow, Arlington Underpass. There was no name, no signature. I looked at my dad. Do you know anyone who'd send this? He slowly shook his head. Don't go, Emily. Whoever that is playing you. Like Mark played me? I asked, the bitterness escaping before I could stop it. His face softened with concern. You're my daughter. Do you think I'd ever lie to you? But I realized he already had, maybe not with direct lies, but through omissions, through the silence that had defined our family for so many years. Mark dozed beside me, and Dad hummed softly along with the radio, an old Johnny Cash song he used to play when I was a kid. Somewhere between the verses, I realized how grateful I was for all of it. The pain, the fear, the revelation. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family, it rebuilds it. As we crossed the bridge into town, the harbor lights shimmered below, reflections dancing on the water. Mark stirred beside me. You okay? Yeah, I said, smiling through tears I hadn't meant to shed. I think I finally am. A month passed before the world started feeling steady again. The investigation ended quietly, the way these things always do when national security meets human failure. Whitaker pleaded guilty to several counts, cutting a deal that spared him a lifetime in prison. The agency cleared Dad of all wrongdoing, calling him an unwitting participant in a classified diversion scheme. I knew those words would haunt him longer than any headline. He stopped wearing his medals for a while, saying they felt heavier than before. But every morning, he'd still raise the flag in his front yard, slow, precise, hand to his heart, because honor wasn't about spotless records. It was about showing up, even after the world had bruised you. Mark recovered faster than the doctors expected. The agency offered him a desk position in Langley for his own safety. He declined. I've had enough walls and locked rooms, he told me. Instead, he started consulting quietly for veterans' mental health programs. If I'm going to fight, he said, I'd rather it be for the ones who already did. As for me, I went back to teaching part-time at the community college, writing lectures on ethics and intelligence work. My students were young, idealistic, and fearless. I saw a bit of both my husband and my father in them, the best parts of each. Life was still fragile, but it was real again. One Saturday, Dad called, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. The sky was glowing orange. Smoke billowed upward. The sound reached me a few seconds later. A deep, rumbling explosion that shook the steering wheel in my hands. And in that moment, every laugh, every toast, every happy memory turned to ash in my mind, because the glow was coming from my father's house. I whispered Mark's name, but no sound came out. My son stirred, startled. I squeezed his hand and whispered, It's okay, baby. It's okay. But I knew it wasn't. Not anymore. The firelight behind us painted the sky red for miles. I didn't look back again. My only thought was to get my son as far away from that place as possible. The road stretched empty ahead, the headlights cutting through the cold Virginia night. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands just to keep the car straight. Mark's words kept playing in my mind. Take our son and leave right now. That serious, urgent tone. I'd never heard him sound afraid before, not even when he came home with bruises he couldn't explain or stories he couldn't finish. Mom, what was that noise? My son mumbled from the back seat, rubbing his eyes. I tried to keep my voice calm. Just fireworks, sweetheart. We're going on a little trip. He nodded, trusting me, and leaned against the window again. I turned onto Route 29, heading south. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop yet. At the next gas station, I pulled over beside the pumps, but I didn't turn the engine off. I needed to think. The folded note was sitting on the passenger seat next to me, its words burning through the paper. Trust no one, not even your father. I opened it again under the glow of the dashboard light. The handwriting was definitely Mark's, sharp, deliberate, written with the same black pen he used for classified reports. I'd seen that writing on debriefing files, mission logs, even birthday cards. Not even your father. It didn't make any sense. The things no one talked about after dinner. The stories that ended with, "You're too young to understand." "I want to believe you," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "But nothing adds up anymore." Dad sighed deeply. "Just promise me you'll stay with family. Don't chase this alone. Let the agency handle it." "I can't," I said, standing up. "I have to see this through." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Emily, if you go down this road, you might not come back the same." I looked back at him over my shoulder. "Neither did you, Dad." Out in the parking lot, a light, steady rain had started. I sat in the car for a while, watching the raindrops blur the windshield. My heart ached, not just from fear, but from the heavy realization that both men I loved could be on opposite sides of something that could destroy us all. I replayed the audio from Mark's drive again, focusing on his final words. "Someone close to you already knows you're on the move." Maybe that someone wasn't my father, I thought. Maybe it was whoever was feeding him information. I decided that the next morning, I'd go to the underpass alone. If it was a trap, I'd find out soon enough. But if it wasn't, maybe I'd finally see the face of whoever was pulling the strings. And maybe for the first time in days, I'd stop running and start fighting back. I left before dawn. The highway was mostly empty, except for long-haul trucks and the occasional commuter chasing their first cup of coffee. My son slept soundly under a blanket in the back seat, small, warm, and blissfully unaware, as children should be. I'd promised myself I wouldn't bring him anywhere near the meeting, so I parked 2 blocks from the Arlington underpass in a church parking lot I remembered from my Navy days. I reclined the seats and waited for the 7 a.m. bell to cover my exit. The December air stung my lungs as I crossed the street. "Come over for lunch, Em. Just family this time. No explosions, no agents, no ghosts." When we arrived, the smell of fried chicken and cornbread filled the kitchen. My son ran to the backyard, chasing the dog around the oak tree. Dad poured sweet tea and smiled. "Feels like the old days," he said. "Better," I answered. "Because now we know just how close we came to losing everything." He gave a nod, and then he grew quiet. "You know, when Mark first called you that night, I honestly thought he was going to tear our family completely apart. But it turns out he was really the only one who was actually holding it all together." "I think he'd probably say the same thing about you," I responded softly. He chuckled a little. "I really doubt that, but I'll definitely take it." Later on, Mark came and joined us out on the porch. The sun was sinking low behind the distant hills, and it was painting everything in this gorgeous golden light. My father had dozed off in his chair, and my son was asleep there on his lap. For quite a long while, neither of us said a single word. The air was perfectly still except for the sounds of the crickets chirping and the faint hum coming from a neighbor's radio somewhere down the street. Mark reached over and took my hand in his. "Do you ever think about how all of this started with just one single phone call?" "I think about it every single day," I replied. It was honestly the worst sound that I had ever heard in my entire life, but it also turned out to be the absolute best thing that ever happened to us. He smiled softly. "It's kind of funny how those two things can sometimes be the exact same thing." I rested my head gently on his shoulder. Maybe that's really what life is all about, just learning which sounds we need to run away from and which ones we really need to run toward. He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You always ran toward all the right ones, Em." I wasn't so sure that was really true. My father was a retired Marine colonel, a man who ironed his shirts at 5 a.m. and stood for the flag even in his living room. He volunteered with veterans programs, helped local charities, and even scolded Mark for missing church on Sundays. How could I not trust him? I stared through the windshield, the low hum of the car filling the silence. Then my phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered it. "Emily," a voice whispered. "It's Ben, your father's aide." "Ben, what's going on?" "Just don't go home. Don't answer calls from anyone claiming to be from the base. Just stay off the grid." "Ben, what are you talking about?" "My father." Static cut him off. Then silence. I slowly lowered the phone, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something bigger was going on, something beyond family secrets. I reached for the flash drive again. It felt warm from my touch, small and innocent looking, but I knew Mark didn't hide things without a reason. Back when we were stationed in Norfolk, he used to joke, "If you ever find a flash drive in the car, honey, it means I've really messed up." I'd laughed then. Now the memory felt like a bad omen. I drove for another hour before stopping at a cheap roadside motel, the kind with flickering signs and buzzing soda machines. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, barely glanced up from her crossword puzzle when I handed her the cash. "Just one night," I said. In the room, I locked the door twice and pushed a chair against it. My son was already half asleep. I tucked him into bed, brushed the hair from his forehead, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Mom's here." "Mom's?" He smiled faintly and drifted off to sleep. I sat down at the desk with my laptop. For a moment, I hesitated. Opening the flash drive felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross, but I couldn't get in touch with Mark. His phone kept going straight to voicemail. I plugged it in. Nothing happened at first. Just an empty folder. Night was fading away, leaving a thin, gray light under the bridge, the kind of light where faces became vague shapes, and shapes could easily be deceptive. I did what Mark had taught me years ago, back when we were young enough to joke about tradecraft. Walk past the location, keep going, check reflections in dark glass, loop back around, and test for tails on the far side. On my second pass, I noticed 2 cars idling at the curb. I recognized one from outside the hospital the day before. The other, a dented sedan with a missing hubcap, seemed like a clumsy attempt at camouflage. I stopped halfway beneath the overpass. Pigeons shuffled in the rafters. The air smelled like wet concrete and brake dust. A man stepped out from the shadows of a column. He kept his hands visible, like he knew I'd be looking at them first. "Emily," he said carefully. "It's Ben, my father's aide." The voice matched the one from the phone call 2 nights earlier, thinner now, and raw around the edges. He'd lost weight since I'd last seen him in my parents' kitchen, where he'd sliced pie and bragged about the Colonel's putting game. "Don't come closer," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "Show me your phone." He obliged, raising it with 2 fingers. "No other movements." "I shouldn't have texted," he said. "It was stupid. They're reading more than we think." "Who's they?" I asked. "People you don't want to name out loud." He glanced at the street, where the idling cars sat like patient predators. "You have the Ephesus files." The name hung in the air like a lit match. I kept my eyes fixed on his. "What do you know about Ephesus?" He licked his cracked lips. "Enough to lose my job for telling you." Hensley Consulting's books started showing consultancy fees routed through 3 shell corporations, Tidewater Trade, Everson Maritime, and Laurel Group. The dollar amounts didn't match the deliverables, and then there were meetings after hours that I was never briefed on. I knew that I'd made plenty of mistakes, doubted the wrong people when I shouldn't have, and trusted the right ones much too late in the game. But maybe that's what redemption really is, not necessarily erasing the past completely, but just learning how to truly live with its lasting echo. The porch light flickered on overhead. The flag in Dad's yard stirred gently in the evening breeze, catching the very last light of the day. I thought about absolutely everything that we had been through, the lies, the fire, all of the fear, and what it had ultimately given us in the end, clarity, courage, and forgiveness. And then I realized something that I really hadn't fully understood before. The real revenge wasn't against any one particular man or some corrupt system. It was actually against the terrible silence that almost completely broke us apart. We had faced it head-on, spoken honestly through it all, and had come out on the other side even stronger than before. When the very first stars finally appeared up in the night sky, I turned to Mark and whispered softly, "You know, when all of this originally started, I honestly thought that we were just running for our lives." He gave me a small smile. "We were. But maybe," I said quietly as I watched my father and my son breathing in perfect rhythm with each other, "we were really just running straight back to them all along." He kissed my forehead very gently. That's absolutely the only mission that's really worth finishing. We sat there together until the sounds of the crickets completely outnumbered all of our words. The very next morning, I watched Dad from the kitchen window as he raised the American flag up once again. His movements were noticeably slower now, but they were also very deliberate. When he gave a salute, the simple gesture was about so much more than just muscle memory. It was pure, unadulterated gratitude. I opened up the window and let the cool morning air come drifting in. Then, after a few seconds, a single document appeared. Read me when safe. I clicked it open. Inside were coordinates, a date, December 12th, and one more line. If I don't come home, tell our son the truth. I checked the date. It was December 11th. My throat tightened. Outside, a car drove slowly past the window. I turned off the lights. The silhouette of a man stepped out briefly to check something under the hood, then drove off again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. I closed the laptop, my heart racing. Whatever Mark was involved in, it was serious enough to make him disappear. Serious enough to make him warn me against my own father. The next morning, I would learn about the explosion on the news. A sudden gas leak caused a fire at the home of retired Marine Colonel Robert Hensley in Fairfax County. Officials report 1 injured and no fatalities. 1 injured. That had to be my dad. I wanted to call the hospital, to go to him, but the echo of Mark's voice stopped me. Trust no one. Instead, I packed up the car before dawn. My son slept in the back seat as I started the engine again. Before leaving, I took one last look at the small motel in the rearview mirror. The sun was rising, painting the windows gold. It could have been a normal morning, a normal life. But normal had disappeared the second that phone rang. As we merged back onto the highway, I whispered into the quiet car, Mark, wherever you are, I'm going to find the truth. Because I couldn't run forever. Not from this, not from him. By the time the morning news replayed the footage, I was sitting in a diner off the interstate with a paper cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. The reporter's voice was calm and steady over the TV mounted on the wall. Authorities say the explosion originated near the water heater. The home belonged to retired Marine Colonel Robert Hensley, my father's name, spoken so casually on national television, as if it were just another headline. Your father thought they were donors for the Veterans Fund. He didn't see the rest. What rest? I pressed. Hardware specs, trial footage, naval prototypes. He swallowed hard. Emily, your father isn't the one selling anything. He's the man they're using to make it look like he blessed it. Wind knifed through the gap in the wall, pushing grit across our shoes. The pigeons shifted again, restless. Why call me? I asked. Because you'll do what the agency won't. You'll choose truth over turf. He took a slow breath. And because Mark asked me to. My heart skipped a beat. You've seen him? Ben shook his head. He slipped me this before he vanished. From inside his jacket, he pulled out a battered green notebook, a standard-issue field journal, the kind they sell by the carton at federal auctions. The elastic band was frayed, its edges swollen with dampness. He said, If I don't come back, she'll find what I couldn't carry. He held it out to me, but I didn't move. Set it down, I said. He obeyed, kneeling to place it near the column. When he stood up, the pigeons clattered overhead, and I heard a door click open on the street. The driver of the dented sedan stepped out, phone to his ear, pretending to argue with someone who wasn't there. The other car's windows remained dark. They're early, Ben breathed. You weren't followed. Not by choice, I replied. I slid the notebook into my tote bag, without looking down. What's in there? Names, times. A meet at the Trident Systems Marina in Norfolk with a buyer labeled Whitaker. The name triggered a long, low alarm bell in my memory. Cal Whitaker, my father's business partner for 6 years. Sunday golf, Christmas baskets, the man who delivered my father's eulogy at a fundraiser and cried on the microphone when a neighbor's son didn't come home from Kandahar. He's the one, I said, the words sounding strange, like I couldn't trust English to convey the truth anymore. Somewhere behind me, Mark poured himself some coffee and then turned on the radio. The news anchor was talking about ongoing peace negotiations overseas, but for once, the words didn't sound quite so distant and far away. They actually sounded possible. I carried my coffee mug out onto the porch and looked up at the flag rippling softly in the sunlight. It didn't really feel like just a ceremony anymore. It actually felt like true healing. Then I spoke very softly, but with complete and total certainty. Trust is something that's earned not by empty words, but by meaningful actions. Patriotism truly means telling the honest truth, even when it hurts a lot to do so. And forgiveness. Well, forgiveness is the kind of courage that ultimately keeps families alive, no matter what. If anyone had told me just a year before that I'd be able to actually find peace after such a deep betrayal, I would have simply laughed right in their face. But now I knew that peace doesn't necessarily come directly after the fire. It's actually what you consciously build from the ashes. So if you're listening to this right now, wherever you happen to be, please call someone that you genuinely love. Tell them all of the things that you just couldn't quite bring yourself to say yesterday. Because sometimes just one single phone call really can save absolutely everything. And if this particular story has touched you in some way, please share it with someone else who really needs to hear it. Maybe it'll serve as a gentle reminder to them that even the very darkest of nights can eventually end in a beautiful dawn. He was taken to Fairfax General Hospital with minor injuries. Sources confirmed no one else was hurt. The waitress topped off my coffee. Crazy world, she said, glancing softly up at the screen. Poor man. I heard he's a veteran. I nodded, unable to speak. My son sat beside me, picking at a pancake, oblivious to everything. The smell of bacon and maple syrup made the whole moment feel grotesquely normal. I paid in cash, left a tip, and walked back to the car. My hands were shaking as I buckled my son in. The air felt colder now, thinner somehow. My dad was alive, but Mark was still missing. At a red light, I dialed Mark's number again. It went straight to voicemail. Then I tried the contact listed as CIA Liaison Langley that Mark had told me to call only in case of real danger. A woman's voice answered after 2 rings. This is Agent Lewis. Agent Lewis, this is Emily Hensley, Mark's wife. He called me last night. There was an explosion at my father's house. Mrs. Hensley, I'm afraid I can't confirm or deny your husband's current assignment. This isn't about his assignment. He said we were in danger. Silence. Then I'll log your concern. If your husband makes contact, inform us immediately. The line went dead. For the first time in years, I cried. Not from fear, but from the realization that I was completely alone. By noon, I had checked into another motel 2 towns away. While my son watched cartoons, I sat on the bed scrolling through every online report about the fire. The official story was thin. Gas leak, contained quickly, minor property damage. But the photos told a different story. Windows blown outward, the roof charred black. That wasn't a gas leak. It was a detonation. I read the captions again and again until one detail froze me. Investigators on scene declined to comment on the presence of unmarked vehicles near the property. Unmarked vehicles. A black SUV. He's at least the bridge, Ben said. Maybe the architect. He masks his transfers through the veteran scholarship pipeline. It's elegant. Ugly, but elegant. From the corner of my eye, I saw the phone-fighting driver end his call and touch his ear, as if adjusting an earpiece. A door on the far side of the overpass hissed open. A third man slipped underneath, wearing a jacket too light for the weather, his hands buried deep in his pockets. And the explosion? I asked. Not a leak, Ben replied, his jaw tight. They wanted your father rattled and isolated. They wanted you blamed for fleeing. And they wanted you to call Mark so they could triangulate his location when he called back. A train rumbled overhead, turning our silence into tinny noise. When it passed, the world felt emptier. What do you want me to do? I asked. Take the notebook to Internal Affairs. Ask for Agent Lewis. She's clean. If she won't meet you, go public, but be careful. But if you can stand it. He paused, choosing his words like a man choosing a last wish. Bring your father in on it. He'll never forgive himself if you fight this war without him. I almost laughed. You want me to tell him his best friend is selling out our Navy out the back door? You want me to ask him to help arrest the man who's been at his table every Sunday for 6 years? Ben's eyes were wet, either from the wind or from a guilt I couldn't quite understand. I want you to give him one more chance to be the man who raised you. A shout cut through the underpass. Hands. The light jacket stepped forward, badge flashing, gun low. Arlington PD, step away from the bag. Ben didn't flinch. No, you're not, he said softly. That badge is wrong. That precinct's patch has oak leaves on the left. Yours are reversed. The man's smile twitched and died. He moved faster now. Run, Ben said. I didn't argue. I pivoted toward the open end of the overpass, the notebook feeling like a lead weight at my hip. My mind went back to that night, the exhaust misting in the dark, the headlights flickering like a signal. I shut the laptop and reached for the flash drive again. There had to be something else. Maybe I'd missed it. I plugged it into my laptop, opened the empty folder, and typed Show Hidden Files. 2 new files appeared instantly. One labeled Project Ephesus, the other Contact List. I opened the first one, a spreadsheet of coordinates, timestamps, and dollar figures, offshore transfers through shell companies. One column was labeled Hensley Consulting, my father's firm. I felt my stomach drop. The contact list was even worse. Several names of contractors and officers I remembered from my dad's retirement parties. People he'd mentored, respected, even called his boys. Next to some of the names, Mark had typed a single word: compromised. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Could Mark have been investigating my dad, or was he being set up? That night, while my son slept, I scrolled through old messages between Mark and me. The last text he'd sent before all this was 2 weeks ago. Dinner at 6. Don't wake up if I'm late. Simple, ordinary. And yet now it felt like a ghost note. A soft knock startled me. I peered through the curtain. A man in a brown delivery uniform stood outside, holding a small padded envelope. Package for Emily Hensley. I didn't order anything. It's prepaid, he said, setting it on the ground. From Arlington. I waited until he left before opening the door. The envelope contained a single key and a typed note, Locker 47. Arlington Storage. Thursday 6 a.m. My breath caught in my throat. It was Mark's writing again. This time printed, not handwritten. I recognized the way he capitalized the A, always slightly slanted to the left. Thursday was tomorrow. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My son turned over in his sleep, mumbling about his toy truck. Footsteps hammered behind us. Ben shoved me sideways toward a stairwell that climbed to the streetcar line. I grabbed the rail and took the stairs 2 at a time, my lungs burning and my pulse counting out the rhythm of my shoes hitting the steps. At the top, I cut left and disappeared behind a bus that was idling just out of its lane. The driver scowled, then saw my face and looked away, showing the kind of quiet kindness that older Americans sometimes display without even realizing they still possess it. I slipped between cars and crossed against the light, shoulder-checking my way through a wall of office workers who swore, then forgot me. By the time I reached the church parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly that I missed the keyhole twice. My son stirred when I opened the car door. Mom, we're okay, I said, willing it to be true. I fastened his seatbelt tightly, and we pulled out onto the street. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ben step into the open, his hands raised, buying us precious seconds, the way good men always have. The light-jacketed man moved in, but a Metro Cruiser turned the corner at that exact moment, and hesitation split the scene in half. I lost them both behind a box truck and never found out how it ended. On the ramp to Route 50, I dialed the Langley liaison again. Agent Lewis, I said when the same cool voice answered. I have Mark Hensley's field journal and independent documentation on a program called Ephesus. If you want it, meet me where a colonel would feel safe. A pause. Where? St. Luke's Chapel, Fort Myer noon. Who will be there? My father, I said, and felt the ground shift beneath the word. And if you're clean, you. Another pause, then understanding. I hung up and exhaled for the first time since I saw the pigeons. The plan formed itself in the empty space of family lunch that wasn't a lunch at all. Tomorrow, locker 47. But another thought crept in. How had the package reached me here? I hadn't used my real name at check-in. Someone knew where I was. I stayed awake until dawn, every creak of the motel floorboards setting my nerves on edge. Before leaving, I checked the parking lot from the window. No SUV, no movement. At 5:30 a.m., I loaded the car, my heart pounding. My son stirred awake as I started the engine. Where are we going, Mom? Just somewhere Daddy told us to go, I said softly. He yawned, trusting me completely. As the sun rose over the quiet Virginia highway, I glanced at the key in the cup holder. Locker 47. Whatever was waiting for me there would either save us or end everything. The drive to Arlington took less than 2 hours, but it felt like crossing into another world. The rising sun washed the road in gold, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts were swirling. Mark, my dad, the explosion, the flash drive. Every mile pulled me deeper into a mystery I hadn't asked for. By the time we reached the storage facility, my son was asleep again in the back seat, clutching his toy truck. The lot was almost empty except for a janitor sweeping near the fence and a man unloading boxes 3 rows down. I parked near the far end, pocketed the locker key, and took a deep breath. The morning air was crisp, with a faint metallic tang to it. I could smell old dust and oil from the rows of metal doors stretching endlessly like silver ribs. Locker 47 was near the center aisle. My palms were damp as I slid the key into the lock. It clicked open too easily. Inside was a small, plain duffel bag and a manila envelope taped to the back wall. The envelope read in block letters, "If you found this, you're already in danger." My breath caught. I tore it open. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. My father shaking hands with men I didn't recognize, seated at conference tables, stepping out of black sedans. A chapel that wasn't just for prayer, and a partner named Whitaker who liked to be exactly where the cameras weren't. If we were going to expose the rot, we'd do it in the light, with witnesses in a place where men still stood when the anthem played. My father had once told me that the worst enemy he ever faced wore his friend's face. Maybe it was time to let him see that truth and choose the side he taught me to love. Grandpa's again? My son asked, his voice hopeful and sleepy. Soon, I said, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. But first, we set a table for the truth. Fort Myer had always been a place of ceremony, white walls, iron gates, and a silence that remembered every folded flag. As I drove through the chapel gates that morning, my heart pounded with the same rhythm I'd heard at 100 funerals, steady, restrained, pretending it wasn't fear. My dad was already there, sitting in the front pew, wearing his old Marine dress coat over his hospital sling. The chapel's soft light caught the silver in his hair and accentuated the deep lines around his mouth. For a moment, he looked exactly as I remembered him, strong, immovable, untouchable. Then he turned, saw me, and everything about him softened. He said, standing slowly. You came. I had to, I replied. I settled my son in the back pew with his coloring book, then met Dad halfway down the aisle. He looked thinner and more tired than the colonel who used to run 5 miles before breakfast. Before I could speak, a woman entered from the side door, wearing a tailored gray suit and a government badge clipped to her lapel. Agent Lewis, she introduced herself. Internal Affairs. Dad's jaw tightened. You brought the CIA here. I brought the truth here, I said quietly. Lewis gave a polite nod. Colonel Hensley, this won't take long. We just need a few clarifications regarding your consultancy, specifically your relationship with a Mr. Calvin Whitaker. One image showed him at a marina in Norfolk with a man Mark once described as a defense contractor flagged by an internal audit. Another photograph showed something even worse. Me, holding our son at a county fair, smiling, with a red circle drawn around my head. My knees almost buckled. I sank onto the cold concrete floor, my heart hammering. Mark must have taken these, or had them taken. But why would he mark me? Why include me at all? Then I saw the flash drive taped to the back of the envelope. It was different from the first one. Smaller, older. I plugged it into my laptop right there on the floor, using a portable hotspot to power it. A single folder appeared. Ephesus recordings. The first audio file began with static. Then came a familiar voice, Mark's, low and steady. If you're hearing this, Emily, it means I didn't make it out. The truth is bigger than either of us. Your father's company, Hensley Consulting, has been used as a front for transferring experimental weapons data to private buyers overseas. He doesn't know the full scope, but he's being used by men he trusts. I tried to stop it, but someone inside Langley burned my cover.
I'm sorry.
I pressed pause, trembling. My father, a traitor? It was impossible. But Mark's tone wasn't the voice of paranoia. It was the voice of a man with nothing left to lose. I hit play again. You'll find proof in the offshore ledgers under Project Ephesus. It's all there. If you can take it to Internal Affairs, ask for Agent Lewis. She's clean. But be careful, Em. Someone close to you already knows you're on the move. If it's not me at the door, don't open it. The recording ended. I sat there for a long time, unable to breathe. The early light filtered through the cracks in the door, dust floating like snow. It couldn't be true. My father had fought for this country for 40 years. He'd lost friends overseas. He carried guilt for things he never spoke about. He wasn't capable of this. The color drained from his face. Whitaker's a friend. What is this? She opened a folder. We have reason to believe Mr. Whitaker is the primary conduit in an arms diversion scheme linked to Project Ephesus. We also believe you were unknowingly used to validate several fraudulent contracts. Dad blinked, stunned. That's insane. I stepped closer. Dad, Ben told me everything, and I have Mark's field notes. Mark, he said, his voice cracking. You're still trusting that man? He was right, Dad. About Whitaker, about the shell companies, about the explosion. Everything. He shook his head, refusing to believe the words. You don't understand. Whitaker saved my command more than once. Colonel Lewis interrupted. If you truly believe that, I'd advise you to call him. Invite him here right now. He looked back and forth between us, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his phone. Fine, he muttered. But when this blows up in your faces, remember who you doubted. He dialed. The call went to voicemail. He tried again and again, each time hearing the same hollow tone. Lewis spoke softly. That's strange. We've had his phone on a trace since last night. Dad turned sharply. What do you mean, trace? The chapel door opened. 2 men in suits entered, displaying Secret Service posture, but not wearing the correct pins. Between them, Calvin Whitaker walked in with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to boardrooms and briefings. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Robert, he said warmly, you look well, considering. Dad's expression fractured. Relief, confusion, and something like betrayal flickered across it all at once. Cal, what's going on? What are they saying? Whitaker's gaze flicked to me, then to Lewis. You shouldn't have brought her into this, Bob. Lewis took a step forward. Mr. Whitaker, you're under investigation for treason and illegal trafficking of restricted military data. Please remove your hands from your pockets. And yet, part of me knew Mark wouldn't lie. Not about this. I drove to a quiet park a few miles away to think. My son ran to the playground, laughing in the cold morning sun. I watched him, and a strange calm came over me. This wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about survival, and about what kind of world he would grow up in. I replayed Mark's words in my mind. Someone close to you already knows you're on the move. That evening, I parked outside the hospital. I needed to see my father with my own eyes. If there was any truth to this, I'd find it in his face. Inside, the smell of antiseptic hit me, sharp and sterile. I followed the hall to room 214. My dad lay propped up against white pillows, a bandage on his arm, bruises along his jaw. His eyes brightened when he saw me. He said softly, his voice still hoarse. Thank God you're safe. I heard you left right before the fire. I hesitated at the doorway. Yeah, I don't even know how to explain that. You don't have to, he said, reaching for my hand. It was an accident. Gas leak in the basement. The investigators already cleared it up. I looked at him closely. There was no tremor of guilt, no flicker of deceit, just exhaustion. Yet something inside me stayed cold. Dad, I said quietly, did you ever work with a company called Traitor Systems? His grip on my hand tightened. Where do you hear that name? I froze. His eyes had changed, sharp, alert, like the colonel I remembered from my childhood. It's classified, he said finally. Emily, some things you don't want to dig into. You hear me? Then why did Mark call me last night? He frowned. Mark? There's something you need to know about your husband. But before he could continue, a nurse entered, carrying a chart. Colonel Hensley, we need to run your tests now. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. Go home, Em. I'll explain everything later. I walked out of the hospital, my heart pounding. He laughed softly. You think you can just walk in here and... But before he could finish, Lewis raised her badge higher, and the chapel's rear door swung open. 2 uniformed MPs stepped inside, followed by a tall figure in civilian clothes, his beard trimmed close, one arm in a sling. My breath caught. Mark. He met my eyes and gave a small, weary smile. Hey, Dad turned, speechless. Mark stepped forward. I told you I'd find proof, sir. And I did. He placed a USB drive on the pew. Everything you signed, every file Whitaker used, cross-referenced with the veterans' charity accounts. You were set up. Whitaker's composure cracked. You don't know what you're talking about. Those files are classified. Not anymore, Lewis said, motioning to the MPs. Take him. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. He muttered something about politics, about scapegoats, but no one listened. The sound of boots on the tile floor echoed like a judgment older than all of us. Dad stood frozen as they led Whitaker out. For a moment, he looked older than I'd ever seen him, his whole posture sagging under the weight of realization. I didn't know, he whispered. God help me, I didn't know. Mark stepped closer. You weren't supposed to. That's how they operate. For a long time, none of us spoke. The chapel was quiet except for the soft turning of my son's coloring book pages in the back. Finally, Dad straightened his shoulders. You saved my daughter, he said to Mark. And my name. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I misjudged you. Mark's eyes softened. You just protected her the only way you knew how, sir. I respect that. Dad extended his good hand. They shook, 2 soldiers from different wars, bound by the same code. When the MPs and Agent Lewis left, the chapel fell silent again. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the pews in red and gold. Dad turned to me. Emily, I'm sorry for doubting you, for everything. In the parking lot, a black sedan turned the corner and slowed as it passed me. The driver didn't look up. I knew then that I couldn't trust anyone. Not yet. Not even the man who'd raised me. Back at the car, my son was sleeping again. I started the engine and pulled onto the dark road, whispering to myself, tomorrow we find out the truth. Because one way or another I was done running. I felt tears that I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. Just tell me we're done hiding, Dad. He nodded slowly. We are. Mark reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. It's over, Em. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in days, the tension in my chest eased. We'd survived secrets, fire, and fear. Now came the harder part, healing what was left. Outside the chapel, bells began to ring the noon hour. The sound was clear, bright, and for the first time since that phone call, beautiful. We left the chapel in silence, the 3 of us walking side by side into the December air. My son ran ahead, chasing the pigeons that scattered across the courtyard. For the first time in days, I let myself breathe. The storm had broken. Mark still moved stiffly from the injury that had kept him hidden. His arm was strapped tight in a sling, but his eyes were sharp again, alive. He reached for my hand, tentatively at first, as if afraid I'd pull away. I didn't. I kept thinking you'd hate me, he said quietly, for dragging you into this. I looked up at him, at the man who'd called me in the middle of a birthday party to save my life. You didn't drag me in, Mark. You pulled me out. He smiled, small but genuine. We drove to the harbor in Norfolk that afternoon. The water was calm, the winter sun glinting off the ships like shards of glass. That place had always been ours, the spot where he proposed before his deployment, the same dock where I waited the day he came home from Afghanistan with sand still in his boots. Dad sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the masts, his hand resting over the old Marine ring on his finger. You know, he said after a while, I spent half my life preaching about vigilance. Never imagined it would be my own friend I should have been watching. Mark answered softly, sometimes the enemy doesn't wear flags, sir. Sometimes he wears your trust. Dad nodded. The words landed heavier than either of them wanted to admit. We parked near the end of the pier. The cold bit through my jacket as I stepped out, but it felt good, honest, grounding. Dad stayed in the car with my son while Mark and I walked to the railing overlooking the gray-green water. What happens now? I asked. Internal affairs will wrap up the investigation, Mark said. Whitaker's facing federal charges. Your father's name will be officially cleared. And you? He gave a half smile. I'll get my clearance reinstated after that. He shrugged. Maybe I'll be done. I'm tired of seeing the worst in people. I understood that better than I wanted to. You ever think about what normal would even look like? Normal is a myth, he said. But peace, that's something I could get used to. For a moment, we just stood there, the sea lapping against the dock, gulls calling overhead. I remembered the last time we were there before everything went wrong. He'd said, if the world ever goes dark, promise me you'll follow the light, not the noise. I hadn't understood it then. Now I did.